Greetings, guys. So let's take a look. The 70s and 80s as they start. What is going on? This is a big time for computers. The first few modules that we deal with, right? There is some really good information. I mean, honestly, you could teach a whole history class on this. Wouldn't that be great? You could take computer history instead of, you know, um, regular history, I guess is what I'd say. American history, sorry. All right, so here we are in the 70s and 80s, and there's a few things that we can point out dealing with social theories, dealing with how society accepted computers. And gosh, I can't remember if I've said this in a video. Definitely said it in class, but really part of what you're dealing with is a massive societal change that that really we just can't underestimate, I guess, if you're going through it. That's why there's so many movies from that era that talks about computers doing this and computers doing that and taking over the world and all that. And again, when you look at what happens with tech companies, the scale of change, it's like taking what happens in any industry and compacting it. So, for instance, a tech company could be there 1 year and then 10 years later cease to exist. Now, I've seen that happen in my lifetime. I wasn't aware of a company called DEC, Digital Equipment Corporation, but they were really successful and really big. But by the time you hit the 90s, they're gone. And so, they were around for 30 years and then basically disappeared. Now, you could say longer, right, because of when they were established and so on. That doesn't happen so much, right? When you look at the auto industry, there was some at the beginning that no longer exist, but the ones that existed basically in the 30s and 40s are the ones that exist now. And so it's a really good way to examine what happens within any kind of field, I should say, different areas where you can take a look at Ford compared to Chevy compared to Toyota, that kind of thing, and what's happening in a very condensed way because you're dealing with Microsoft and Google. Who is Google? Today Google's it, but Google's a young company. Uh, whether or not Google's around or whether or not Microsoft or Amazon or any of those are still around in 20 years really depends on the choices they make now. Because again, in the auto industry, they can screw up for 10 or 20 years and then still recover. In the computer industry, you screw up for 10 or 20 years, you disappear. So, anyway, let's take a look. One of the things I like to point out is there's tons of people. If you watch stuff on Steve Jobs, especially, he kind of liked to rewrite history according to how he told it. He was always doing that. Now, no, don't get me wrong. I mean, again, people, I am trying to tell the truth on all of this. And so I'll start talking about the great things that Steve Jobs did. And he was truly a visionary. He honestly was. I mean, he envisioned tablet computers before most people even thought that they would do that, right? But at the same time, he also had his problems. And so, with tech people, you always end up with that I can only see one side of it, and I'm only going to say the positive about them, or I'm only going to say the negative about them. And that's just not the way it should be, right? As an example, Sony has some very positive things that they offer and have done, and Microsoft has some very good things and bad things that they've done, and same with Nintendo. And I use that as an example because those are usually areas that my students care about. But we should be able to speak honestly, even if I own an Xbox. I can speak honestly about how stupid Microsoft is in some ways and how smart they are in others. So that's why you get that kind of like, does he like that or not? Well, because I'm not going to defend stupidity. And Steve Jobs really, he's like, we're the first ones that did this. We're the first successful computer. No, you weren't really. And he says it enough times, right? And there's tons of people out there that believe that. Thankfully, due to the internet, you can now find out. about what's there. So way back in 1970, there was a computer called the Data Point. And there it is right there. Fantastic little computer. And a lot of people really do consider that the first real computer. Now, our story, for instance, if you start talking about Microsoft, really begins with the MIT's Altair and what happened on the MIT's Altair. Because really, again, when you look at American history, right, it's like, well, why do we keep talking about Columbus? Because the Vikings were already here. And what about all these people that were already here? And now we know that a lot of those people are not even from the same continent, that they all came here from different parts of the world, even before the Vikings, And the reason that they talk about Columbus is because something huge happened right after that. And even though you've got the Vikings coming over, all the Vikings didn't move over, right? They just had a few colonies here. So we have a bunch of different stuff happen. These do not have links. The ones that are green do. And this is a great website, oldcomputers.net. And I kind of chose them because I see them as a little more honest. I've looked at a lot of different websites, and there's some obviously really good ones out there, like the computermuseum.org. They've got a lot of good stuff. But this is truly, truly just honest. They're just laying it out. This is when it was released. This is what it was, right? So the reason this one is important, so this is going to be part of Bill Gates and Microsoft's story, and an illustration of how somebody who is really looking at what's happening with technology can really advance themselves if they are. And that's what I want you to be doing, right? I'm looking at retirement in about 15 years, right? So I've spent a majority of my time working, and I got to where I wanted to be. And that's the honest truth. You may look and say, oh, EAC is just a little small thing, but I went to EAC and I thought it was fantastic and really wanted to work at EAC. And so I got what I wanted. And part of the reason why I did is because I had this view of technology and where's this going and what's the next greatest thing, and is this thing great, or do I just like it because everybody else likes it? And I was really able to kind of keep track of all that. Otherwise, I never would have got this job. And that's the honest truth. So I hate talking about myself, but in this small community, basically, I was really, really, lots of people knew me, and they knew me for being really good at what I did. And that was anything computer related. So I could fix your computer, or I could give you advice on what you ought to buy, or how you ought to use this piece of software and how that was going to be used, and why it was going to become a big deal. And when that happened to me, right, there wasn't a lot of tech people around here. Most of the tech positions out here in the Gila Valley are filled by students that me and Lydia have taught, right? So this tech industry has grown here. Our students have taken those jobs, which is really fantastic. So when I was here, there was only like 3 or 4 tech positions, and I was known to be really smart when it came to that. And that's because I took an interest in everything that was happening. I just didn't go, well, I know how to fix computers, so I'll go in and do that, right? I kept up on things, and I still do. That's why my courses change. That's why you get this information. So anyway, this is Microsoft's story. I'm definitely not Bill Gates, that's for sure. His brain has been compared to how a computer works, and that he takes all these little pieces of information and looks at them and tries to decipher these huge data sets in his head. I would say if you have Netflix, you need to watch the Netflix documentary on him, where they talk to him, because he's done amazing, incredible things in these past few years. Even though he's not really with Microsoft anymore, watch it. You really will not be sorry that you did. Anyway, so this is the MIT's Altair. This is a computer that has no monitor. It has no keyboard. You would program it with these little switches right here. You flip them up or down, right, on or off, and then these would light up. And really, this is just copying what was done way, way, way before. And a lot of people say this was the first personal computer. Now, so you know, this type of machine that's that small, or this type of machine that's this small, or this small, are called micros. They're still often referred to as micros in the business, mostly these days it's called a personal computer, right? But we take a look at, do they have, no, they don't even have one here. The digital group. Okay, so yeah, there's a bunch of boards that you're going to have to plug in all yourself. Let's take a look at the IBM 5100 just really quickly because they have a picture of that. That's what it looks like. Those at the time were not called PCs, they were called micros because you had mainframes, then you had minis that were as big as the refrigerators, and then you had micros that could fit on a desk and be for a person. So, anyway, back to MITS. What happens is Bill Gates is in school and his family's rich. He comes from a lawyer family, and they're very, gosh, I don't know how you would really put it. They're a traditional family, and how I mean that is dad goes off to work and he's a lawyer and he makes all this money, and then mom spends her time doing volunteer stuff. So she's on many boards, and that was kind of a way of thinking at that time that the guy would go to work, the woman raised the family and she does volunteer stuff. And she has been noted as being hugely influential. And that's kind of one of those interesting things that comes out of the story is that, right, dad is the lawyer, so obviously he's influential in his sphere, but she is influential across a lot of different things because she's donating all her time on these boards. And that becomes kind of political, right? So in any case, he's at school, and let me see if I will pull up a picture here on one of these. Let's see, Bill Gates at school. So you can see what he looked like. He really looked young back then, and so way into, I'll pull one up of when he gets arrested. Yes, Bill Gates was arrested. And he looks like he's like 14 or 15. But here he is, and he actually is put into, he's kind of advanced a year, is how you would look at it. And this is Bill Gates and this is Paul Allen. And these two individuals are the ones that start Microsoft. So they're the ones that get Microsoft going. Paul Allen is a couple of years ahead of him. So Bill Gates is like, it'd be like saying that he's a freshman and a junior, or a sophomore and a senior. And they both like programming, they both like computers, and this is a computer. So what you're seeing here is a computer, not a typewriter. And you dial into the city mainframe system, and then they have a little time that they could use it. Because again, this is a school for rich kids, or at least parents that are willing to pay that kind of money to get them into school. So they get to use these computers, and they're both obviously really, really good at math. They're good at everything they do. One of the first jobs he does is he actually programs a computer to control lights in Seattle, Washington. And so that for the city. So that was pretty dang good at this age, right? This age, wow, he's young when he's doing that. Then a little later, and this is an interesting story that I didn't even know until I watched that documentary that's on Netflix, but these two individuals, because they're kind of friends, they're pretty close. And he talks to the school and says, we can do that job for you. And the job that the school needs is to be able to sort through classes and students and get them registered and in class the way that they're supposed to be. This school offered a lot of opportunity. So extracurricular things that you could do, many classes you could take, and it's kind of what one of the things they prided themselves on. But it would take several faculty all summer long to go, oh, well, Bill Gates has got to be in this class, but he also wants to take this. So that means he has to take this here, and boom, boom, boom. It was a big mess. And the honest truth is, I remember going to EA back when computers were still, they were being used here. They'd probably put them in 20 years earlier, but still setting up your schedule. You basically were showing up to class before you really even knew if you were in that class or not, right? Before you could really know what that schedule was. Because it took all that time to figure out who can be where, and do you have course conflicts, and now computers just do that for us. So he tells him he can do it, right? And what he's planning on doing is going and getting a couple other people that are really good at programming, and getting Bill Gates, that's obviously awesome with programming, and get them to all together as a team make it, and then he'll probably keep most of the money, right? Because that's the way he's thinking. And so he goes to Bill Gates and he's like, I got so and so and so and so, and I'd like you to be part of this team, and we're going to make this program for the school, and they already said so, and we'll get paid for it and all. And he's like, no, I'm not doing it unless I'm in charge. I'm not doing it. And basically told them, you don't have the skill, and they don't have the skill to figure this out. I'm the only one with the skill to do it, and so I'll be in charge of doing it. I'm not going to waste my time being told what to do when it won't get accomplished. So already, you think, well, man, that's kind of a jerk move. And honestly, as teenagers, right? As teenagers, we do a lot of stupid stuff. But one thing for sure is that he understood that, look, I'm the one that knows what to do. I already know you can't do it, and I already know the other people you have can't do it. So I'm not going to sit around and monkey around with this thing, right? If we're going to do this, I'm in charge because I know how to get it done. And of course, it turns out that he's like, well, screw you. I'm going to go do this. We can do this without you, blah, blah, blah. And of course they can't. And they end up coming back to him and saying, okay, you can be in charge. And then he figures it out and they get it going. He was a genius. Now back to this situation, back here over on Steve's place. This computer comes out, and by this time, Bill Gates is in college and he's finished. So Paul Allen's done. And I know you don't know a lot about Paul Allen. He got sick after he started Microsoft. And that kind of rearranged his thinking. In other words, so sick he could have died. You can look it up. So he takes his money and invests it in something else. And he's, still a multimillionaire person. But it really made him think like, do I want to be in the office all the time when I'm dying and maybe dead in a few months? And so that kind of rearranges things. And that's why you don't hear so much about him, because he leaves Microsoft pretty early on. Anyways, so he sends Bill Gates a magazine article that's got this computer in it. And basically the whole idea is, hey, remember when we used to sit around talking about this stuff, right? This is it. This is when it's happening. The wave has begun. And really what they're thinking of, right, is I'm going to catch this wave and I'm going to ride that to the shore. And it's going to be an awesome ride. These people are not driven by, let's go out and make a ton of cash on this, right? They're looking and saying, we can be a part of this wave. This is so exciting. So $650 assembled is what this costs. This was really the first computer that people could afford. So if we look at the data point, I believe they've got a $7,000 price tag. Here's your HP. And it's a $5,000 price tag, right? So this one is actually, people can afford it. And I can't stress enough that this is a massive amount of cash in the 70s. Look it up. There's lots of calculators that'll show you what $650 would equate to today, but it's thousands of dollars. So you're still talking about people either buying a really nice vehicle or a computer. That's really what you're talking about. So this is what they did. Now, the operating system on this was already set in place, CP/M, which was the major operating system that was being used at the time. And we'll talk about that guy in a minute that did that. But BASIC is a programming language. And so I'm going to pull up, if I can spell right. Basic programming. The basics of programming. That's not what we want. I should have probably put history of BASIC. There we are. So let's just go to this particular site, ThoughtCo. That'll give us enough information. Basically BASIC was, didn't mean to say that, but anyway, what happened was BASIC, Beginner's All-Purpose Symbolic Instruction Code, was developed at Dartmouth by John George Kimney, I can't say that right, and Tom Kurtitz, as a teaching tool for undergraduates. So basically, the idea of BASIC was programming is hard. especially then, right? So programming is difficult now, but back then it was really hard. And they were looking at a way to get people involved in programming, get them enough interest in programming, right? And so it was really this really easy to use. So let's look at let me show you an example. Example of basic code so you can see what this looks like. So we're just going to go to the images. Not basic HTML, but basic itself. Let's find, there's a good example. So there's a good example of what basic, this is what I had to learn. 10 input, what's your name, right? And then this is a string. This is something that's going to store the data. And so it's going to take it and put it in this, and then it's going to take it and put it in this, and then spit out the results in the little tiny program. So you can actually see that there's words in here and it makes sense. Now, maybe you don't like it, right? So if lean a $sign equals 0, then go to 90, which is right here, right? So if you don't have any stars, let's give you some stars. That's basically what that's saying. I don't like to program, but I can understand that. And I actually that's what I had to learn is basic. Let's look at what you would have had to do. Now, every single computer has something way down low of a way, I told you that computers, they work with binary, right? Ones and zeros. Well, how do we get the ones and zeros to be put together to tell the machine to do something? And so I just can't type. Assembler language or assembler instruction is a much better way to put that. But anyway, there's a set of code built way into the computer that allows you to interact with it when you say, I want you to make this kind of sound, or I want the mouse to move in this way, that kind of thing. And really, this is what it would look like, right? So you got to put in this C0038613 init A LDA A pound. It's like, what is this, right? This is different than basic. And so every single computer has a way that you talk to that processor. And so, almost all processors use the same code these days, at least on PCs. Now, on our mobile phones, they all use a different code because it's a different type of processor. Who wants to do this? I mean, who wants to do it? But that's what's happening before BASIC, before Fortran, before C, before C++, any of that. This is what you would have to program in. Oh my goodness, who would want to do that? And a lot of it's going to be in hex because that's how the memory locations are stored. See, 2F0A. It's a hex storage there. So let's go back to Bill Gates. So what Bill Gates did for this old computer is write BASIC. So he's making a program that will deal directly with the hardware and interpret what you wrote in BASIC and create the code that the hardware needs to know. So it's going to interpret it, right? You're going to type in go to blah, 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 and it's going to do this for the processor. I mean, bam, that blows my mind. I'm not a math kind of guy, and that takes a lot of intelligence to do that. Of course, that's already been done for us now, right? There are people that focus on doing that. Now, I'm sure they get paid a lot, but when you're up there programming in a Objective-C on a Mac, or C on Linux, or C++ or C# on Windows, right? You're writing the code up here, and then it's being converted to what the processor needs. So that's what he did. And the amazing thing, I know if that wasn't amazing enough, the amazing thing he did is that he programmed all that based on specifications that he was reading about the processor and so on, without ever touching the computer. So he doesn't have one of these in his dorm room and he's like planking it out, trying to get it all figured out. Let me just type this. Okay, let me type that. Nope. He basically writes it all up, and then they go over to New Mexico. This is actually being developed in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And they drive all the way over there, and there's the code. And he types in all the code in on this machine, and it works without a problem. Wow. Flawlessly typing it in is one thing, flawlessly understanding the logic is a whole nother level. It's just amazing what he did. And he did get arrested because once they won the bid, right? Once they were like, yeah, let's put this on there because obviously the computer is going to become much more usable if we have a way to program it easier. Bill Gates arrested. So what ends up happening is oops, I spelled that. Not surprised. There he is, smiling as they go out to celebrate, and he gets a little tipsy, which is, in his own words, is not something that he would normally do. But Paul Allen was, a little more of that kind of person. And they were driving down the road out there, and there was basically a dozer sitting there that somebody left the keys in, and he got on it and drove it. Can't remember if he wrecked it into anything, but the police saw him, and he got arrested there, 12/13/77, and he's smiling because who the crap cares, right? They just got their first deal, and that's really what Microsoft becomes, and that's why it's named that. Like some people are like, Microsoft, what does that come from? Well, it's software for micros. So they're going to do software for microcomputers, and that's the foundation of Microsoft. Where did that come from? The mere fact that Bill Gates understood what was happening, and Paul Allen understood what was happening, and it was a massive move that really we needed in the United States and the world. They got it. They totally understood, and they were very young. So they became millionaires. They always talk about Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, which I'll look at in this next video, and how they became millionaires, overnight. But so did these guys. They just weren't as interesting, I guess, to talk about. But yeah, they became millionaires quick. All right, so the next one will be about Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak over at Apple and where that fits into things. And then I'll talk a little bit about Commodore because there's an assignment, there's an extra credit you can do on that. And where do they fit into all this? And there's some good examples of what they decide to do in a bad way that ends up killing their company, because you guys don't even, you can't buy a Commodore computer, right?